Hello and good afternoon, and welcome to this video tutorial on PVLAN Edge ports, or Private VLAN Edge, which is a feature that was introduced by Cisco quite some time ago. In fact, you can actually find support for this all the way back to the 2950 series. And we're going to be taking a look specifically at the use cases for the PVLAN Edge. And if you look here at the screen on the right, you can clearly see that we've got a nice description here on the Cisco website. And it says the PVLAN Edge, it's a protected port. It's a feature that only has local significance. And so this was really the predecessor to private VLANs. So it's locally significant, so the PVLAN Edge can only be implemented between hosts that are on the same switch. And what it's going to do is it's going to block any traffic between two protected ports. And so the main use case for this would be in maybe a co-located facility where you don't want to have to use a number of IP subnets. You want to keep everybody on the same subnet, but you don't want to allow them to talk to each other. So it could be a colo facility, it could be a multi-tenant situation where you've got, maybe you have a building with multiple individuals from multiple companies, and you want to keep them all on the same subnet, but you don't want to allow their devices to communicate with each other. This is almost, I was talking with a colleague yesterday, and this is very similar, conceptually anyway, to wireless devices where you block peer-to-peer communication. So when you have multiple wireless devices using a single access point, if you're blocking peer-to-peer communication, those devices can't see each other. And so it's kind of similar, again, conceptually, where we're going to have a wired situation at layer 2 where we're going to block all layer 2 traffic. And so if you're referencing your text, and this is why I'm doing this video up, is I get a lot of questions. There's a lot of confusion around, everyone sees private VLAN, and so typically, and I've got a quick reference here, even though it's for the Nexus, this is still germane to the conversation when we talk about catalyst switches. And this is where a lot of the confusion comes in is students will see Private VLAN Edge, and they'll look at the private VLAN setup where you'll see you've got community ports, isolated ports, promiscuous ports, primary VLANs, isolated VLANs, and community VLANs. And so this is kind of the maturation or the improvement of what was originally just the PVLAN Edge, or Private VLAN Edge, which is referred to as protected port. So this, the Private VLAN Edge, and what we're looking at here in the Routing and Switching Essentials course, this is mutually exclusive from private VLANs, where we're talking about configuring primary VLANs, isolated VLANs, community VLANs. So this would be another video, and this is something that you won't find at the CCNA level, probably going to be in the CCNP switch course, and definitely when you go to study for your CCIE, you're probably going to be required to have that down. So what we're going to talk about again is the CCNA level, the PVLAN Edge, Private VLAN Edge feature, which allows us to set up protected ports. And so let's go ahead and jump in here. I've got two switches, so we've got switch 1 here, and then we have switch 2. And so right now I have both of my clients on switch 2. Now we're only going to be able to see one of those clients, which happens to be this iMac that I'm on right now. And so my IP address here is 192.168.1.69, and I'm able to ping 192.168.1.70. So as you can see here, we've got full communication between the two ports. But let me go ahead and we're going to do a little configuration. And so we'll go from we'll go from user exec to privilege exec, and then into global config. And I'm going to say do show IP interface brief, so that we can see that FA23 and FA24 are both connected, and they're both in the up state. And so these are the two ports I'm pinging back and forth on. So let's go ahead and let's do some configuration that we should already be familiar with here. So I'm going to say interface range FA0/23 to 24, and I'm going to say switch port mode access, switch port access VLAN, and we'll just simply say VLAN 192 is going to be the VLAN that we're going to be a part of. And so that VLAN didn't exist, and so it's going to be created. So if I were to say do show run interface FA023, you can see I've got an access port, switch port mode access, and I'm a member of VLAN 192. If we take a look at 24, you can see the same thing. Let's come back over here. As you can see now, the pings have stopped because we changed the configuration a little bit. And so what's going to happen after we do that configuration change? And there it is it's going to basically, spanning tree has to do its thing, and it's got to go from the listening state, the learning state, and then to the forwarding state. And so now what we have here is our communication is back. And so as you can see, these two hosts can clearly communicate, and this is the only configuration I have on the switch right now. So none of the other ports are configured. I don't have anything else configured. Just simply 2 access ports in VLAN 192, and as we can see, we've got connectivity. All right, so here's what we're going to do now. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change the port into which my iMac here is plugged into. In fact, let me go ahead and let's move the iMac pings to their own window so that we can see we've got connectivity here, so we can kind of watch it in real time. So what I'm going to say now is, let's exit out here. I'm going to say interface FA0/23, and that's the port into which this iMac is plugged. If I say switch port, and I'll do the question mark there, you can see we have switch port protected. So I'm going to go ahead and say switch port protected. Now this is key to understand, that when you use the PVLAN Edge feature, it's only relevant between ports that both have switch port protected on the port. So I haven't placed it on FA024, therefore we still have connectivity. And as you can see here, the pings continue. We're not having any issues at all. So what if I say do show interface FA0/23 switch port? And let's see if it shows us any information here. Whoops, shows us any information here. So the switch port's enabled. It's a static access. That's the administrative mode because we've placed it in that mode. The operational mode is static access because, again, we've done switch port mode access. We're not doing any trunking. You can see we are an access port, and we are a member of VLAN 192. Again, no trunking is enabled here. And protected right down here at the bottom. So this is what you would look for to see, is the port in a protected state. So PVLAN Edge is on this port. Let's take a look and see what we see on FA024. And what we would expect to see is that it says false, which it does right here. So the PVLAN Edge, or a.k.a. the protected port, is not turned on FA024. So let's go ahead and let's do that now. So we'll say interface FA0/24, and now as I'm running this command, if you keep your eyes peeled over here on the right, what would we expect to see? I'm going to say switch port protected. So I enter the switch port protected command and take a look at that. Pretty cool. So immediately we lose connectivity between the 2 switch port protected ports. Now, it's key to remember that, as we saw previously, protected ports can still communicate with non-protected ports. It's only protected ports, and only those ports that are protected ports on the same switch. And so here's what I'm going to do now. I have a number of links between these two 2950s, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a trunk link between, we'll just do an ether channel. We'll throw it into an LACP ether channel real quick, and we'll create a trunk link between, port channel between the two switches. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to migrate or move one of the connections, and I'll move what I'm pinging here is I'm pinging a MacBook. So I've got a very old MacBook plugged in, which I use for demonstrations, and that's what's at address 192.168.1.70. So we'll move that port over to switch 1, or move that connection for the MacBook over to switch 1, and then we'll see what happens, and then we'll activate the port it's plugged into on switch 1 as a protected port to prove conclusively that with the protected port, or the PVLAN Edge feature, that it does not work across switches. So we're going to show that it is locally significant, right? Okay, so let's go ahead, and I'm going to exit out here. I'm going to say interface range FA0/1, and I've got 8 very small cables between these 2950s, so let's use them all. So we'll say interface range FA01 to FA08. Now we're going to say channel group 1 mode active, because we're going to use LACP. So we've created port channel on interface, I'm sorry, we've created port channel 1. So now let's go into interface PO1, and we want to make this, I'm going to say switch port mode trunk, and then switch port trunk, and what do we have here? So we're going to change, well, I guess we'll leave the native VLAN as 1 for the demonstration. We want to make sure we just get this up and running. So do show ether channel summary, and so there we go. Now these ports are all down because I need to step over here to switch 1 and do the same thing. So I'm going to say for the enable command there to go from user exec to privilege exec, and then config terminal to go from privilege exec into global config. And I'm going to say interface range FA0/1 to 8, and then we're going to say channel group 1 mode active for LACP. I could do passive on this side, but we're not going to. I'm just going to go ahead and make it active, because this is more about the protected port status than it is about the ether channel config. All right, so now I'm going to say do show, or actually let's get into that port channel real quick. Interface port channel 1, and we're going to say switch port mode trunk, and let's do a show ether channel summary on this side. Do show ether channel summary, and we've got all of our ports are down right now, and it very well may be because we have not brought them up. So let's go ahead and say interface range FA0/1 to 8. And I forgot to do my no shut, and let's see if that might have something to do with it. Although I think the ports may have all been up. Let's go ahead and do the same thing here. So interface range FA0/1 to 8, and we're going to say shut. And we'll say do show, or not shut, actually I wanted to do no shut, but it looks like they were up, so maybe this is going to give it the kick it needs. And then I'll say no shut, and we'll bring these guys back up here, and let me go in, we'll check the so do show IP interface brief. Let's check the port channel, see if it is up or not, and it is down. So let's go into interface PO1 and say no shut, and we'll do the same on this side here. We'll say interface PO1, and we'll say no shut. So do show IP interface brief, and we'll scroll down here. And I apologize, it looks like 1 through, did I no shut those ports over here? Alright, so I'm down right now, so let's go ahead. I forgot to bring these guys back up. So interface range FA0/1 to 8, and we'll say no shut. So we'll bring those guys up to show IP interface brief. And so they still show down, and interface range FA0/1 to 8, and we'll say shut, and then we'll bring these guys back up and do a no shut. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and pause the video here. I'm going to actually go and physically move the MacBook 192.168.1.70 connection over into switch 1. So stand by, we'll be right back. All right, so we're back, and I actually had to replace some of the cables there. I had some non-crossover cables that had been plugged in there previously, so put some crossover cables in, and so it looks like we may be up here. So let's say do show IP interface brief. Let's make sure that those ports are up. Okay, so they're in an up and up state, and so let's do a do show ether channel summary, and let's check the configuration here. And all right, we look good there, and we've got the lowercase d default port. So the ether channel is up, looks good on switch 1. Let's check do show ether channel summary here on switch 2. All right, and we are good to go. So on switch 1, what we're going to want to do here is I've moved the MacBook over here, the 192.168.1.70, and so let's go ahead and get into interface FA023. So he's in the same port that the iMac is on, and we're going to go ahead and say switch port mode access, and we're going to say switch port access VLAN 192, and so we're going to put him into the same VLAN, and as you can see there it says creating VLAN 192 because it didn't exist. And I'm going to go ahead and let's do a do show run on interface FA0/23. And as you can see, the configuration here on switch 1 is going to match the configuration over here on switch 2. If I were to exit out of here and say do show run interface FA0/23, with the exception of the switch port protected. And as you can see, spanning tree went ahead and did its thing, and so now that VLAN is in the forwarding state, so we have now reestablished connectivity even though we're a protected port. Let's remember that the Private VLAN Edge feature states that only between protected ports on the same switch will you block all broadcast, multicast, and unicast traffic, right? So it will literally isolate two hosts or two or more hosts, however many you have the switch port protected feature on. It will literally segregate them within the same VLAN. So they have the same subnet, the same VLAN, yet they're unable to communicate with each other if they're both protected. So now let's do this here on switch 1. Let's go ahead and let's see, does it work across switches? Because remember, according to the documentation here, it says that this is a locally significant event. And where is it at here? Protected, yeah, port in the same switch. And so this was one of the major limitations of the Private VLAN Edge feature, which is why Cisco then came out with private VLANs, and actually that is going to fail. Let's stop that. That's going to fail because my host is plugged into the switch. Just remembered I'm using it as for a demonstration. All right, so we're going to say switch port protected. Let's leave that up and let's see, is that the case? And it is. So if I do a do show run on interface FA023, it's in protected mode, so it's Private VLAN Edge. If I do a show interface FA023 switch port, oh, sorry about that. Let's get that do in there. So Control A. And let's see, what mode are we in? Protected mode, it's true, right? So protected mode is true on the port I'm plugged into on switch 1. And we just did the do show run int, so you can see there it's protected. This is the iMac port, so this is the actual system I'm recording on right now. Let's go ahead and do a do show interface FA023 switch port, and let's see. It is in protected mode. So, true to the documentation, it is only a locally significant event. It's going to block all traffic locally. However, it's only for traffic that's on the same switch. And so this is what the PVLAN Edge feature is all about. We talked about some use cases where you would use it. And again, the limitations of something like this really make the private VLANs, the full-blown private VLAN feature, the preferred feature, because that is going to allow you to do what we're doing here. However, it will actually allow you to do it across different switches. And so that would definitely be a great idea for an upcoming video, and we can certainly take a look at that. And again, we were just looking at the PVLAN Edge feature, also known as protected ports. And just like they show it here, it is locally significant, right? And we went through and did some of the configuration. We even got to take a look at setting up a port channel there with 8 ports between the 2950s that we're using in this demonstration. All right, so to disable the protected port, I would just simply say interface FA023. I could just simply say no switch port, whoops, not port security, no switch port protected. And then if I were to run the do show int FA023, what will we expect to see here? You're absolutely right. The protected mode goes to false. All right, well, that concludes this video tutorial on PVLAN Edge ports. Hopefully this has clarified some of the confusion that exists between private VLANs and then sort of this one-off earlier solution, which was just the PVLAN Edge feature. That it, again, locally significant, won't work across switches, but will definitely work if you're on the same switch. And the use cases that we talked about, you may have a multi-tenant situation where you want everybody to be in the same subnet. However, you don't want any of those hosts to be able to communicate between each other without first having to go out to a layer 3 device. And again, very similar to conceptually when you're in a wireless environment, where if you have peer-to-peer communications blocked, that means that one iPhone can't speak to an iPad, can't speak to any other wireless device, can't even see that device. And this is very similar, except in sort of the context of a wired situation. And again, that big limitation, it is locally significant, and we've been able to prove that here with this demonstration. All right, thank you for watching, and have a great evening.